is Andrew Antoniou, an artist who grew up in England, transitioned to Australia, became very Australian, even with that English accent. And we've got Richard Morecroft, a very well-respected journalist who was presenter, as everybody knows, on the ABC TV News, and more recently is host of Letters and Numbers on SBS, and a mixed media artist himself.
As a practicing visual artist for the best part of 45 years, I suppose, has been that I've always imagined an audience, and I think all artists do this. We imagine how the images that we create will come across. I think my perspective has changed a little bit over the years because I feel that, in a way, that the audience has changed for me. I quite often imagined in my younger years, I guess you could say, up until I was even 50 years old, that there was an audience out there for me. What I realise now is that there is no specific audience. I think what there tends to be now is an imaginary space that we live in as artists, that where we invite audiences in to our space to view the work. We try to see the work as others might see it. I guess this flies in the face of ambition in some ways, and I guess I'm at that point now to enter into the magic of my own work in a much more less self-conscious way, where I'm not pitching this at a certain aesthetic or a certain audience. What it's allowed me to do is actually look more closely at my own volition, my own vision, and allowed me to be in that space as the audience and the creator. That doesn't necessitate me saying that I have no ambition for my work. I do. I put my work, as you know, Beulah, out there, and Richard, you would know this also. I enter prizes. I show with a fantastic couple of galleries, the Van Rensburg Gallery and Australian galleries. And I keep that side of my life going. But what this is about, and what is important, is that we actualize this part of ourselves where we bring dreams and imaginings into tangibility.
Yes.
I think that's how I see my role.
I think that's a really interesting role, because I think in this day and age, so many people assess success by what did you show, what did you sell, which show are you going to be in? And I think as artists, you have to make, you have to create. And especially now, you have to be in the studio making things. And I think it's really interesting in your work, you make magic. People fall in love with the magic. You don't need to necessarily explain your work to people, and you don't want to. And the beauty which we saw in the exhibition called Curtain Call that we had, thankfully, in our Milton Gallery, and that we were going to show in New York, the beauty in that work is the magic. And it's not necessarily that you sell it or you show it or whatever, it's that you have to make it, and that this work is being created. And I think that that is such a beautiful nuance that you are saying now. And knowing you for quite some time and loving your work for such a long time, I think that that's a really important thing to know, especially a lot of artists who are in their studios at the moment kind of stunned with the state of the world. Richard and Andrew, you've known each other for a very long time as friends.
We have.
Yeah.
Yes, and I really appreciated at the opening, Andrew gave a beautiful talk about his work, an artist talk that Richard, you posted on Instagram was, how did you describe it? A masterclass in an artist talk and opening. And I think this was really interesting because Andrew didn't talk about process. Andrew talked about the meaning, his approach, his working. It was a really interesting analysis from you. And I think knowing him as a friend and knowing his work and his progression, I would like to know from you why you thought that was such a masterclass.
The most wonderfully impressive thing about Andrew's talk at the opening, and it was a wonderful opening, was that he simply invited us into his mind, as just for a few minutes he did when he was speaking a few minutes ago. Andrew gave us a sense of how he thinks and why he thinks and what he feels what motivates and moves him, and in, without, as you say, trying to tell us exactly, how he etches or how he puts on paint or whatever. He spent a lot of time, very eloquently, trying to bring us into the world of his experience, and try to share why that was, why it was, as it is, fascinating and sometimes mysterious and sometimes full of symbols and sometimes full of dreams and sometimes full of heritage, going back to that Greek parentage that was mentioned. There are myths, there are symbols, there are stories that you tell there. So I really enjoyed that. It is not common, or it's certainly not always the case, that people who create complex work can, or indeed want to, add really articulate explanation or invitation verbally into that as well. And Andrew did that effectively and very unapologetically. It's a big risk to put yourself out there and say so much, because it was a complex speech, but it was rich with insight and with revelation into his brain, and his brain is an interesting place.
I did make an allusion to magic as opposed to conjuring in the talk. I think we are, as artists, engaged in the business of magic. As I said in the talk, this is not about creating an illusion to trick the senses, but creating an alternative perspective, an alternative reality. Because really, when you think about it, it's how we feel that is the magic. When a conjurer does his trick, whether it's in front of kids or adults, the magic is in that suspension of our belief. The moment that the hat is empty, there's no rabbit in it anymore, that's the magic. It's not how it's done, it's how it makes us feel. Entering these alternative realities is something we do every day, but we don't appreciate it. What we tend to do is we tend to explain to ourselves why it feels different. And then we do that, we then lose that feeling. That magic has gone, we've explained it away. And I think that part of the reason we are creatures who require this magic in our lives is because we live through it every night and every day. And we are bewildered by it, confused by it. Sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's illogical. But the fact of the matter is, it is the very daily thing that we experience every day. The moment we wake up from sleep into the waking state is a transformation. The moment we go from sleep into dream is another transformation. The moment that we pick up a book and read a line and we're suddenly in the middle of St. Petersburg in 1918 is another transformation. The whole business of being human is traveling from one miracle of magic into another. It could be painful, nightmarish, pleasurable, erotic, joyous, whatever. But those are the realities that I try to put into my work, that nothing is real and nothing to get hung about, as John Lennon once said.
I do think we are living that in an extreme point right at this very moment with this virus, and we wake up and so many people are dealing with it in such a different way, but this is can be looked at as a magical time where we are being transformed, we are transporting ourselves, and we have to try and stay sane, we need to transport ourselves into the magical world. If it's in the nighttime, if it's that transportation from your sleep into your consciousness, into your semi-conscious. And I believe magic. Always have, always will, from the minute that we met. I mean, come on. And it's, you see people walk into a gallery and fall in love with artwork, and they actually fall in love with the idea of what's happening in between the piece of work on the wall or the sculpture, and it's that space in between that's happening within your body. That is magic.
Yeah, it's certainly a moment. Part of the thing about magic, and I'm not sure whether you'd agree with this, Andrew, but part of the thing about magic is that it's not always sparkle and delight. That magic can be quite a dark, transformative place. It can be a place where there are mysteries and uncertainties and puzzlements and unsolved things which have significance, but you can't tell what they are, and that can be sometimes disconcerting, and that can still be magic. It's one of the things that I've always enjoyed, particularly about your work, Andrew, is that you invite us into these strange, dreamlike places. And in fact, behind all three of us, one way or another, is an example, although mine's a little bit in the background here, but examples of your work that are either in the gallery or, in my case, hanging on the wall in our home. I mean, this work, for example, which you can't see in detail, but it's called Costume Drama, and it has a whole lot of figures and strange birds and humans dressed in odd ways. Are they part of a carnival procession? Are they part of a dream? What do they mean? We don't know. You've never explained, and I don't kind of want you to. I want to be there in that dream, in that magic, in that uncertainty. But this is a slightly dark and possibly even slightly sinister place. It doesn't make it any less magic. But it's rich with possibility, and that, for me, is where the magic lies, in the possibility, and that possibility is the thing, hopefully, in these dark and very strange times that we're largely in at the moment. The sense of possibility of good and better times in the future is the magic that we're looking forward to.
Yeah, because this is another kind of theatre. A different curtain has opened. And we're now looking at a different stage. And the thing that intrigued me about theatre was the fact that once the curtain opens, you're now in this world. And it doesn't happen necessarily in a theatrical space. It happens in the space we live in daily. And I take your point about the darkness, because I've always been a great reader of Greek myth, and the myth of the underworld, the Plutonic myth, if you like, is full of that dark shadow. But it's also Pluto, which we get the word Plutarch from, where rich people, the wealth is in the underworld. It's in the dark spaces that wealth of knowledge, that wealth of self-understanding lies. And in some ways, we learn our greatest lessons when we go through painful, dark experiences. Yeah. And we've all been through them to one extent or another. I think what we're looking at here is, with my work particularly, is throwing all these elements together in a seemingly unrelated, manner. But the fact of the matter is, our life is a kind of like a collage of things. We have our inner world, we have the outer world, we have our relationships, we have our memories, we have our aspirations, and we have those dark corners of ourselves which we never talk about, even with our closest relationships. I try to let them all live on the same canvas. My understanding of Greek myth is that none of it is a happy story. If you look at the Greek myths, they are full of murder, deceit, failed expeditions, incest, narcissism, you name it. There's not a lot that's happy about it. Even when a human has dallied with the gods or the goddesses and given this moment of richness and given this moment of euphoria, it's quickly taken away. Because that is to say that you cannot live in that state without understanding that there is a price to pay. So the darkness in my work is really about that balance. It can be colourful and entertaining, mysterious, but it's also quite challenging and enigmatic. And I think that those qualities are things that I try to bring into myself before I go to the canvas or the paper. Because otherwise I will be just reproducing images that have those qualities in them. I think you have to be very careful that you don't contrive this. This is one of my biggest problems, that the contrivance of an image like this is very seductible. You know, it has that ability to sort of say, well, that'll look good and that'll look good and that, you know. But the fact of the matter is, you then become slave to the image.
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting point. All artists, I think, have that one thing that drives them crazy, that they work on over and over again. And Kubrick references it with Raphael's Madonnas, in that when they look at Raphael's Madonnas, he thinks that he's trying to achieve beauty. But actually, if you look at his sketches, he was obsessed with composition, completely obsessed with composition over and over and over again. And for you, like when you approach your canvas, and I love when you talk about your work and how you approach it, because I think that's a really, really special moment for you. And we've talked about it endlessly, is when you go to the canvas, what's your thing? How do you stop yourself doing that? What's the one thing in your work that, you know, for me, underpainting. I mean, I drive myself mental with underpainting. What is the one thing for you that you continuously strive for? I mean, you've got such a long experience and such a well-respected artist. What's that one thing?
That making images is a process of banishment. You're banishing these images to the outer world. You no longer want them to have dominion within your psyche. So what I try to create on the canvas or the page is a vehicle that allows that banishment. Because if they take residence in your psyche, they become the master and you become the slave. What you do want is a partnership. You give them a presence and say, okay, off you go, on your way, you know, out of here. Allow room for these, and it may be that those images, those people, those characters, those symbols, they might find another form within the psyche. Invariably that happens. Jung talked about it all the time, this kind of displacement of one symbol for another, or displacement of one identity within that symbol for another. And that's what you have to kind of be aware of. Do that. You know.
Can I just make the observation, you know, you're talking about this word banishment, which in a way, I mean, maybe it does have to be thrown out of your brain. But I'm looking at the works in particular, the, you know, large works behind you and behind Bueller. And you may have banished them from your brain, but they are gifts for somebody else. You know, that is the joy of it. It may have left you, but it gains this new identity as a gift of a portal to a dream, a portal to thinking, a portal to symbolism for somebody else, the viewer, or perhaps even the lucky purchaser or owner of an artwork, so that they can contemplate it time and time and time again, which is what one wants to do with really intriguing work. I get your banishment, but I feel much more positive about the product of that banishment. It's, you know, the product is a wonderful thing. You know, I love this work. You know, it may have been banished from your brain, but I'm really glad it's in my house.
Don't get me wrong. It's not a sort of one of those things where it's a criminal and we get it out of the country. You know, it's not like that. It's what it is a sort of, in a way, what it's saying is it doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to you, and then you can then go into a conversation with that person, with that symbol, with that archetype, whatever it is, and adjust it to your vision. And it's true that, you know, people say to me, "Oh, you must like particular artists." And certain artists have influenced me to such an extent where they've become almost standing at my shoulder while I work. You know, somebody said to me, "What's it like working in isolation?" I said, "Well, I've been just doing it for most of my life, so it doesn't feel any different."
It's so funny.
When you were making that point, Bueller, about you know, lots of artists kind of doing what they've done for a long time, but then lots of other people who are now stuck in isolation going, "Oh, you know what, I think I'll be an artist because I can do that while I'm here." And in a way, it feels a little bit like that process of, you know, when everybody got an iPhone or a phone with a halfway decent camera, you know, all of a sudden everybody becoming a photographer because they had easy access to the process.
Yeah.
But Andrew, you know, I mean, I think that's part of what you differentiate so clearly is that it's not, I mean, it is about the process. You've got to be able to do the process, but it's what your mind is doing with the process that defines whether the result is actually of any value to you or to the community or to anybody else.
And I think it is about who you are, not what you do.
Exactly.
You know, I remember one of my first tutorials when I was a first-year student at Winchester School of Art, and I remember and I made this big painting of a scene from a Greek myth. And John Bellany looked at me and he said, "Yeah, it's not a bad painting, but what are you trying to say? What are you trying to say, mate?" You know, and I just didn't know. And unless you feel that there is something you need to actualize, you need something to say, then really you're not an artist because you're just a practitioner.
And in so many ways, surely part of what it is that draws someone or a community to value and respect the work of an artist is that there needs to be a sense that artist has some insight, has some revelation is a very big word, but you know, has a sense of revelation that even they may not fully consciously understand, but that they are absolutely compelled to share. And that process of sharing it and the sense that what you're being given, that gift, if you like, that I was talking about earlier, is a thing of real value that not just anybody could give you, but that this artist can give you in their own special way through often their own very particular signature medium in whatever way that is. But it's the revelation that you're looking for, not just the process or the object or the painting on the wall.
And that is the magic. And I think that's also, you know, when we are in this situation where everyone's picking up a brush, the magic has to be worked on. And the magic is going back into the studio over and over and over again, trying to get that magic out. And that's a struggle and a dance. And some days you win at the magic and you're the magician, and the other days you're a failed magician, and you've got to continue to do that. And that's, I think, the frustrating thing is what we're finding with a lot of artists is that they're like, I don't know, everyone seems to be doing it now. And it is that same reference to when everyone got the iPhone. And
it is, you know, it's not about talent. Talent is, I always think that talent's like a brand new car in the driveway with no destination.
Yeah.
Vision is what compels you to work.